Alright, it's time to record. So today I wanted to do another list. So previously I did a list on top 10 favorite video games. I had a lot of fun making that video, and I wanted to do another one similar to that, and I was having trouble kind of figuring out what to do next. We're going to talk about my 5 favorite RPGs, tabletop RPGs. Out of the 5 that I picked, they're all great, and you're going to have fun playing any of them. It's going to depend a lot on your taste. So for the uninitiated, so a tabletop RPG is like what you think of when you think of Dungeons and Dragons. Just like playing with dice and pencils and paper, and really using the theater of the mind to create most of the fun. You're cooperatively telling a story with the players and the game master or dungeon master. So at their cores, most games play out like this. The game master presents the players with the situation. The players determine how they want to react to that situation. Dice are rolled to determine success or failure. Then the game master updates the players with a new situation based on the results. That's a really simple layout for how those games play. So with that in mind, I want to read off my 5 favorites and some things I like about them and some things I don't like. So number 5 for me is Shadowrun, namely the 5th edition. So Shadowrun is not usually what people think of when they think of tabletop RPGs. It's a futuristic sci-fi / fantasy mashup setting. It sort of takes place on an alternate timeline Earth where early in the 21st century, the sort of unknown phenomena, is phenomena singular or plural? So it's phenomenon when it's just one. Okay. Transformed a bunch of people into the fantasy races that are sort of typical of, your Tolkien-esque settings, elves, orcs, trolls. You can see a lot of your old fantasy tropes play out in a futuristic setting with drones and the Matrix and sort of a capitalist dystopian nightmare world that Shadowrunners live in. So some things that I really like about Shadowrun are its setting. They have so much content that you can read and learn about the world of Shadowrun that really helps you have a more engaging experience with the world. Shadowrun does a really great job of keeping their setting interesting, and pretty much every edition they kind of add more cool stuff. Another great thing about Shadowrun is lots of dice. If you like rolling dice, you're going to love Shadowrun. That's a pretty good amount of d6s or 6-sided dice to roll in like a Dungeons and Dragons game. Pretty much just like spell damage or falling damage, stuff like that. It's the only time you're going to roll that many or more. It's not uncommon for you to be rolling that many dice or more every turn in Shadowrun. For a lot of people, that's a frustrating part of Shadowrun. For me, it's one of the most satisfying parts. Shadowrun has a lot of really good risk management tools that other games don't necessarily have. Shadowrun's setting is kind of unique in the sense that it's pretty much understood that when you're playing as a criminal for hire. It's a lot like playing Ocean's 11, the game. Your group is sort of a small cadre of different specialists people can hire, kind of no questions asked. A lot of time in Shadowrun is spent scouting and getting information and trying to make decisions based on that. A lot of the mechanics themselves really are risky to use. The magic and resonance systems in the games to cast spells and do things in the Matrix. The more effort you put into something, the riskier it is, but it also means the rewards are greater. There's always going to be times in Shadowrun where you're in a position where you can either save the group or kill your character in a single roll. That kind of high stakes play is really interesting, and it makes for a great story. There's plenty to not like about Shadowrun. I think it's the reason that so many groups won't play it. Combat takes forever. If you have a group of 4 players, it's about average. and more than 5 enemies, you could easily spend 2 or more hours fighting it out. There's a lot of like simulation type stuff going on in Shadowrun, and that can bog the game down a lot. It's possible for you to have an hour-and-a-half gunfight in the middle of a city only for your character to get picked off by a drone or something, instantly killed. In my experience, Shadowrun rulebooks are notorious for being confusing. Some mechanics in the game you won't use for months of playing, and then when you need it, everybody has to flip back in the book and read a 10-minute example of how it plays out and then argue about the ruling. So when I first got into Shadowrun, I started playing in 4th edition, and I pretty much only play 5th edition. One of the big appeals was the idea of like having, you know, characters shooting their way out of a building while they have a mage like having a spirit battle with another ghost or something, and they're all trying to protect their technomancer, who is like using his brain to like enter the matrix and try to steal data from this big corporation. That all sounded great, but here's the thing. Running it like that, where it's all, you know, you've got the physical realm, the magical realm, and the matrix all at one time, is really frustrating as a dungeon master, at least. Trying to remember how things work in each of those realms, because they're all different, making sure that every player has time to do what they want to do, while still keeping the sense of urgency in the game, which is key for Shadowrun. It's really difficult, and honestly, most game masters that I know that play Shadowrun do everything they can to not have all of those things happening at one time. That's really frustrating because, again, to me, it's a big appeal of the game. If they could find a way, maybe in 6th edition, to like make all of that stuff run well, I think Shadowrun would easily be my like 2nd favorite. So my 4th favorite is definitely going to be divergent from the pack, is Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition. So 4th edition of Dungeons & Dragons is really notorious for being a breakaway from the standard model of how 20-sided die systems run. It's a lot less free form than some of the systems are. It's a lot more structure. I can see why people are frustrated with this now, but I started playing RPGs in 4th edition D&D. Up until about 2013, it was really the only system I enjoyed playing. So firstly, if you want to play Dungeons & Dragons and say you're playing Dungeons & Dragons, but you've never played an RPG before, I really think that 4th edition is probably the easiest system to dungeon master. Everything's very like simple and easy to read. It's very easy to kind of manage monsters and build encounters and treasure hoards. Prepping from session to session is very simple. I'd say it probably takes like a quarter of the time of most other systems. If you've got limited time, I really think that 4th edition is the best bang for your buck as a dungeon master. In 4th edition, every time you level up, you get something cool. One thing I thought was really cool about 4th edition was the Heroic, the Paragon, and the Epic tiers, where, you know, you might start as a fighter, but then you become like the defender of so-and-so, or you become like a battle master or something like that. Now, like, you're still a fighter, but you're also this other thing that gives you more like specialized powers. It really helps flesh out the idea that your characters becoming more powerful is sort of like a cut above the regular person. The tier mechanic is something I'd like to see them return to eventually in some way. So there's really 2 main things that I personally don't like about 4th edition, and I think that they're the source of a lot of people's frustration with it. So 4th edition is very heavily dependent on playing with a grid and buying the miniatures or finding something to use as miniatures anyway. Power cards, condition counters, all this stuff, it really does feel like the system was made to sell accessories, which I played with graph paper mats and made my own little miniatures out of washers, glue, and paper. So personally, I feel like people complaining about that is a little silly, because you can easily make stuff to do it at home. A lot of people are frustrated by gridded play, preferring theater of the mind. I like both, really. But I can definitely see the frustration of having, you know, this 5 to 10 year span where they're only producing books for an edition that you're not interested in playing. The other problem is that after you've played the game a lot, it starts to feel like all of the characters are a little bit the same. The problem with giving everyone cool stuff at each level is that a lot of times in the books they give people the same stuff. Pretty much every class can be built in such a way that it mimics the abilities of the other classes. One of the hopes with 4th edition was that they would make combat less lengthy. They didn't really accomplish that. I feel like the fights can end up turning into a bit of a slugfest where it's pretty clear what the outcome is, but you still have to fight it out anyway. There's more rounds in a combat of the same length as older editions. At least at my table that was true. So players got to do more things in the same amount of time. You were just still stuck in combat. So moving on, number 3 is going to be Pathfinder. So a lot of the people that were frustrated with the direction that 4th edition was taking really flocked to Pathfinder, which was a rules revision of the old 3.5 version of D&D. They kind of took that idea and ran with it. Pathfinder is now its own fully fledged system. Pathfinder is affordable to get into, but there's only one book that you need to play Pathfinder. You can buy that PDF for like $10. They also have a smaller paperback version that costs about $25. Up until the release of 5th edition, getting into Dungeons & Dragons is actually a fairly expensive investment. So one thing Pathfinder does really well, pretty much better than any other game, it's very easy to build a character that fits your concept at level 1. If you're a dungeon master that's not very imaginative, or you don't have a lot of time, or both, you'll really like Pathfinder's adventure paths. They're really well written. I've been making my own adventures for about 10 years, but it's really hard to compete with the story writing of a board of amazing artists. Honestly, unless you're an exceptionally talented writer yourself, you're probably going to find that their adventure paths are pound for pound better than anything you could come up with. Adventure paths take a lot of guesswork out of what you're going to do next session. It's very easy to sort of gauge how much content your group can get through in a session, and then just kind of read that much in the book every week to make sure that you stay on track. All their adventure paths take place in the world of Galarian, which I believe is one of the most interesting settings ever. It has so much variety and well-written content, you can just get lost in it. Do you want to have your typical Dungeons & Dragons, swords and sorcery type adventure? They got plenty of that. Do you want to have city intrigue? You can do that. Do you want to go fight dinosaurs? They've got that. Do you want to have a sci-fi setting? Fine, they've got that too. Some of their earlier adventure paths aren't quite as good as the new ones, but they're still fun. Even though I like Pathfinder a lot, and honestly I've been playing it up until this last year, there's a lot that I don't like about it. I think on this list it's got the most negative things. Combat maneuvers are really cool. They let you knock your opponent over, or break their armor or weapon, or disarm them. So much different cool stuff. Pathfinder makes it really frustrating to do a lot of that through feat taxes. So in order to do those things reliably and usefully, you have to spend a lot of your feats, which you only get a few of. Even if you're a fighter where you've got plenty of feats, you're still usually better off at least mechanically spending them somewhere else. This is pretty aggravating because classes that can't use magic in Pathfinder already have limited amounts of things that they can do to help the party. It encourages making very one-dimensional, damage-oriented builds, and I just really feel like anything that makes the game less interesting is bad. A lot of classes in Pathfinder kind of feel useless compared to others. Especially at higher levels, it can be really frustrating to be a fighter or a barbarian at level 15, and you can do a lot of damage, but during that same level, the wizard in your party is going to get spells that let him change the way the world works. that doesn't extend just to Magic users. Pathfinder developers really seem to hate monks. So monks in your D&D games basically like martial artist fighters, and in Pathfinder especially, they're really not very good. At least compared to most of the other classes. I've seen a lot of people make a monk come to the table and after a few sessions are utterly disappointed at how useless they are compared to the other people playing. The game isn't all about winning or making the mathematically best character, but at the same time you shouldn't feel punished for playing a character that is different. Especially since the monk is one of the core classes. It comes with the main book. Zen Archer monks are pretty good though, but archery in Pathfinder in general is just ridiculously good. So I feel like the developers of Pathfinder have a very poor sense of balance. Every year they come up with changes and stuff that make a lot of characters that are already underpowered even more underpowered. And they'll take characters that really are stronger than anybody else and make them more powerful. I'm not sure what makes them do that. Another issue with Pathfinder is that they will release books chock full of new options for your character, but 90% of them will be bad. I mean mechanically bad. Some of them are interesting choices to make your character more three-dimensional. There are a lot of options that are just really, really good, and the adventure paths are sort of geared towards the idea that you're making your character optimally. They will release a book full of options that you might regret taking because your character, through constantly taking these interesting flavor choices, is essentially just a lump. This is actually a designed choice by the development team to make stuff that is bad for your player for you to choose. In their goal to have a rule for everything, they release a lot of books full of junk. They're not the only people that do that though. So my second favorite is Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. So I played 4th edition right up until the playtest for 5th edition came out, and I immediately switched. I'd had a lot of experience with Pathfinder by then. I really liked the more freeform play compared to 4th edition. There are just so many rules in Pathfinder. My groups usually tend to consist of mostly new players that have never played any RPGs before. I really liked D&D Next, which turned into 5th edition. 5th edition plays a lot less like a simulation than other iterations of Dungeons & Dragons that Pathfinder have. So 5th edition has a really shallow power curve, which is really nice, especially if you're a Dungeons Master running off the basic rules. So your character gets more powerful with every level and gets something cool with every level. They never get so powerful that the monsters they fought at level 1 are no longer a threat. I think that's really cool because it means that every entry in the monster manual is valuable the entire time that you play. The rules for 5th edition are very simple, and a lot of stuff is left to Dungeon Master interpretation. It's very aggravating to have to look up the rules for every single interaction that you can have with the world, at least in my opinion. 5th edition gets rid of a lot of that by just streamlining the rules and letting you as the Dungeon Master make the call. The background options are really cool. They give some nice flavor to your character while also giving your character more things that they can do mechanically. The basic rules for D&D 5th edition are free off Wizards of the Coast. I'm going to have a link to that in the description. It gives you a few of the most common races and the fighter, cleric, rogue, and wizard classes. This lets you build a very typical fantasy party and can serve you in good stead all the way to level 20. You can easily play for upwards of 2 years just off the basic rules for free. There's two things that I don't like about 5th edition. One of them is more mechanical, and then one of them is sort of just me complaining. So the low power cap has a weird side effect in 5th edition that your character can never really become the master of a skill. It's really hard to get higher than a plus 11 on anything, which means that even on some more basic tasks, you can weirdly fail. And then secondly, this is really just me complaining that I just personally really do not care at all for the Forgotten Realms. I think just all of the Driz books and stuff have really ruined it for me. You can obviously run the game outside of the Forgotten Realms setting, which I highly recommend that you do. problem is that I can see that Wizards of the Coast is going to really focus on putting everything in the Forgotten Realms, which means if you choose not to play in the Forgotten Realms, you're going to have to do a lot of converting on your own. It also gives them an incentive to... It also means they're going to focus on producing flavor content for the Forgotten Realms, like the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide. I think it gives them less incentive to support the other settings. You can see that they're making an effort to draw people in for the other settings with Curse of Strahd. I'm just concerned that they'll end up making 90% of their content for Forgotten Realms, and then everybody that likes different settings will get one book. But that's just really a problem for me. So my number one favorite is actually really new to the scene. I've been reading it and playing it, and I really honestly think it's going to be my new favorite forever. It's the Index Card RPG by Runehammer. His RPG system is really a culmination of all of the stuff he's been doing on YouTube as Drunkens and Dragons, introducing really interesting key mechanics to your games regardless of system that not only streamline the work for you as a dungeon master, but make the game more enjoyable for everybody. The system really works with any setting, but he does give you 2 settings in the book that are both pretty interesting. It's really easy to teach people how to play it. I think you could read the book once over and teach your players how to play in the course of one session. Unlike pretty much all other systems, I really feel like Magic users and non-Magic users are really balanced. There's no Vancian magic like there is in Dungeons and Dragons. You learn magic through spells that you get in loot from completing quests or defeating difficult monsters and things like that. The loot system is really good because at any time that you're playing with a group and you decide that you'd like to fill a different role, you're a conversation with your DM and a few adventures away from completely changing the way that your character works. Most of the rules and advice can be implemented in other games, and it will make your game a lot more interesting and enjoyable. So I feel like the game plays very fast and dangerous, but also very rewarding. I think it's really easy to get yourself killed in Index Card RPG. Stories are conflict, and there's plenty of that. Taking a risk and succeeding usually means a pretty big payoff in ICRPG, which is something that a lot of the other more simulation-esque RPGs don't really do very well. Most of the mechanics are very intuitive and not ambiguous. That was sort of one of the goals of the system's creation, was taking a lot of the ambiguity out of the game. Initiative is usually weird and aggravating to handle. Even systems that come up with cool ways of handling it, like Savage Worlds does with a deck of cards, usually just end up being more frustrating than practical. ICRPG's initiative system is really awesome. Everybody rolls, whoever's highest goes first, and it just goes clockwise from there. The players can manipulate turn order by sitting in their marching order. That's actually encouraged in the book. It's a very weird meta thing that I actually think is really cool. There's really only 2 things about this that I don't like, and both of them are things that will be resolved over time. But the first one is that the system's just very new. It just came out like 2-3 weeks ago, so finding a group of people that are ready to play is going to be pretty hard. You might have to volunteer to be the dungeon master, and you might have to teach everyone else how to play. But it's really easy to play. If you can find people that are just mildly interested in RPGs, I think this is a great one to introduce them to. It being new means there's also not going to be a ton of material for it yet. That being said, there's already 2 volumes of monsters and items and stuff that you can buy. Both of those issues will be resolved as time goes on. It's been out for 2 weeks, and it will honestly be hard for me to go back to playing other systems. I'm going to have a link in the description for the core rulebooks to all these systems, as well as the basic rules for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. If you're broke, start there. If you don't mind shelling out $20, I really think ICRPG is worth it. Oh, this is going to be a long one. Well, thanks for toughing it out with me. You can't go wrong with any of these systems. They're all fun. They just all have their quirks. If you have any questions or comments about this, please leave them below. Subscriptions, likes, and views are all really appreciated. As long as people are watching these, I'll keep making them. Thanks for watching, and I hope you come back tomorrow for my Week 3 HRT update.